Member for Castries South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I noted you had wished the Prime Minister a happy birthday, and I think his colleague also did the same. So in true parliamentary spirit, I also want to wish him happy birthday. I tried to figure out his age, Mr. Speaker, and maybe you can help me, because I saw a clip recently where he said he went to the comprehensive school, soon to be demolished, 34 years ago. And if he went to comprehensive school 34 years ago, I assume he's around 44, 45. So I'm not sure, but regardless, a member from Mico North, happy birthday to you. Mr. Speaker, I also have a laugh, have a good laugh. Mr. Speaker, I also noted that you congratulated comprehensive. I wasn't the one, Mr. Speaker, who said that the school is likely to be demolished. It was said in New York. It has been carried. Solutions are debating it.
This
Mr.
is not
Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, you also congratulated the West Indies cricket team, the women. But I also want to congratulate St. Lucians for coming out and giving such tremendous support to the team. I'd also want you to note, Mr. Speaker, and in speaking to some former colleagues from the ICC, they reiterated the fact that the Bosejo cricket ground, the Darwin Summit cricket ground, is one of the best designed in the world. Small, intimate, one of the best designed. It was designed by St. Lucians, who also designed Providence cricket ground in Guyana and the St. Kitts cricket ground. And it says a lot about the competencies we have in St. Lucia to design sporting facilities. But that's another story for another day, Mr. Speaker.
No, make it today, man.
Mr. Speaker might stop me and tell me to stick with the bill. Mr. Speaker, I listened to the member from Castries South East, and he reminded me of a very famous children's story, Alice in Wonderland, where Alice said she did not want to go among the mad people. And then the cat said, but we all mad in here. How could you not want to be among the mad people? And the member from Castries South is a sack of contradictions, a bag of contradictions. And I want to focus on this bill and to take you through a few points. Motion. The member stood up and he said, the Labour Party came into power and they had no vision. How could you come to government and you have no vision? And you wanted to have a vision commission. But in the same breath, he says, basically, we do not know what to do to build a sustainable developing society by 2022. So we hire in, spending $13 million for somebody to tell us or to assist us to get to know what we have to do. But it's the same person who said, how can you come into government and not know what it is you have to do? But if you knew what you had to do, why are you having this? Why are you having it? Because you boasted, you knew what had to be done. But now you're going to spend $13 million for you to be assisted. Mr. Speaker, it took the government 2.5 years to realize they did not really know what they were about. 2.5 years. 2.5 years to now realize they did not know what they were about. And they now need workshops to tell them what has to be done for the next 3 years. But the member from Castries South is let the cat out of the bag. Hear what he said. We are dropping in the ratings. We are dropping in the ratings. So of course there's a need for this. He also said, things are not nice and proper. So yes, there is a need for this loan. He also said, Mr. Speaker, projects are being delayed. So yes, there is a need for this loan. But all of us in here would recall, execute, execute, execute. You remember this? Yes. Mr. Speaker? We are the masters in execution. We don't need no advice from you all on the other side. 2.5 years later, there is no execution.
No, man, there is.
There is no execution. We need CDB to come and have labs with us, have workshops with us, to the tune of $13 million so we can learn how to execute now. Is the Soufrière Square executed? Is Radio St. Lucia executed? And Mr. Speaker, when we started this morning, I noticed the mics were not working. You can imagine what came into my mind? Whether or not next month is the last month for this building, because we were told Parliament building, the courthouse, and the printer will be broken down by the end of the year. So I was wondering whether that was already a sign of the breaking down of the building. Execution again, Mr. Speaker. Execution. So if the honorable member, and he said he is the Minister of Economic Development because he's the master executor, and he comes there today to tell us, we don't know what we have to do for the next 3 years, so we're borrowing $13 million. So we can have workshops, and we can now decide what is needed to achieve a sustainable developing society. The exact words of the member from Castries office. Now I'm left to wonder, you spend more time in government than you have left, and you're only now trying to decide what it is that you have to do. Mr. Speaker, in the budget this year, it was announced that there will be 2 new units in the Ministry of Finance. That's March this year. March this year. And let me call out to you the 2 units. The National Integrated Planning and Program Unit, $840,000 would be spent on setting it up. And the National Competitiveness and Productivity Unit, $1.3 million to set it up. We were told then that those units will do exactly what this new unit will be doing. Now, explain that to me. And these are masters of execution, huh? Mr. Speaker, explain that to me. In March this year in this House, 2 new units in the Ministry of Finance. To achieve all the things we are now being told today, we're taking a loan of $13 million to do. Did we not know that in March when this was presented in the budget? And you are masters of execution? It makes me wonder. And I'm not going into, and I must tell you, Mr. Speaker, I try to understand exactly what the $13 million will be spent for. Would the $13 million be spent for consultancy fees, hosting workshops? Is it to pay salaries? Is it to pay technical people? I have no idea. None, Mr. Speaker. But let's put that aside, because the government, if it has now discovered that it really had no idea where it's going, and now needs to find out where it should go, they're going to take a loan of $14 million to find out. But what's even more worrying, Mr. Speaker, and before I go on to it, Mr. Speaker, I want to say something on education. And I need you to say to the member for Mico South that it really hurts our hearts as St. Lucians when he speaks of education in the manner in which he does. Mr. Speaker, you and I know each other from a previous life when we fought for youth and student rights in this country.
Serious?
Yes, he was a noted radical in his youth days. Mr. Speaker, you would recall we were part of a campaign called that education is a right and not a privilege. Amen. Education is a right and not a privilege. Every single St. Lucian has a right to education and to achieve the highest level of education. Governments do not subsidize our youth to give them education. Government invests in our youth when they give them education. I cannot accept anybody saying to young people, this is a favor we're giving you, we're subsidizing your education for you. When a country spends money on educating the young, that's an investment for the future. And $15 million is not enough for Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. It's not enough. We should be spending more on our young people to give them the necessary education that they need. And I'm not saying Sir Arthur Lewis is perfect and they're producing the best students. I'm not saying that. But the ideological mindset must be one. No, there are challenges in the education system. Let's not deny that. But the ideological mindset has to be to fix those mistakes and to treat young people as the generations that will carry this country, and we need to provide them with the skills and competencies to do so. And when we spend money to do so, we're not subsidizing them, we're investing in them. And I think that's an important distinction that we have to make. But let's come back to the bill, Mr. Speaker. Let's come back to the bill. So this government is now going to spend $13 million to develop a plan to tell them what to do in the next 3 years. But let's look at borrowing, Mr. Speaker. And I really want St. Lucians, students, and members of this House to reflect on it. You do not yet know what you're going to do. You do not yet know what you're going to do. But listen to this story. Based on the budget, the estimates, this government borrowed $196.6 million in 2016. 196.6. In 2017, it borrowed $241.2 million. And based on estimates for this financial year, which ends in March, it will borrow $300 million. A total of $738 million since 2016. $738 million since 2016. But it gets worse, Mr. Speaker. It was announced last year, well, at the budget, the last budget, but not reflected in the figures, that the Prime Minister was able to get the Taiwanese to agree to lend St. Lucia $150 million US. 100 million US would be going to the airport, and 50 million US, I think, for schools and for roads. That's not reflected in the 738 million that I spoke about. We later learned that that was not enough money for the airport, so a local consortium of banks would be asked to put together a loan of 75 million US dollars. All in this year. All in this year. And then the honorable member from Castries Southeast said in an interview with Rick Wayne, our Prime Minister is such a skillful negotiator, he got the Taiwanese to top up the 150 million US, and we'll now get 200 million US in loans from the Taiwanese. So think about that. 200 million US is 540 million EC. Now those figures are not yet included in the 738 million I spoke about. So Mr. Speaker, if you add the 200 million US from the Taiwanese, you add the 75 million US from local consortium of banks, do you know how much money we'll be borrowing for this year alone if this government gets its way? 1 billion EC dollars. This year alone, they will borrow 3 million according to the estimates, and from the Taiwanese and the local consortium of banks, we will be borrowing $1 billion for this year alone. And if you add what was borrowed in 2017 and 2016, this government would have borrowed, if they get their way, $1.5 billion. Think about it, Mr. Speaker. St. Lucians, think about it. $1.5 billion since 2016 for a government that now says after 2.5 years, we do not know what's required, so we're going to bring in experts to tell us what to do for the next 3 years. You announcing you're building a new airport. You're building a new wing at St. Jude's. You're investing in roads. You're investing in schools. You're borrowing 275 million US dollars. That's not even in the estimates yet. And you're still admitting that you do not know what's required for a sustainable developing society. And you're already borrowing this year alone $1 billion. Mr. Speaker, explain the logic of that to me. Wouldn't it be more sensible to wait for the outcome of all of that, deliberations and workshops, and then decide to go and borrow? Wouldn't that make more sense? Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I'm missing something. Well, I must tell you, you both said, the honorable member both said that they were masters of execution and they didn't get advice from anyone. And 2.5 years later, he's saying that things are not fit and proper and our ratings are falling. But he also said that they had 3% growth. Mr. Speaker, when you borrow $1 billion in a year, you're supposed to be topping up 10% growth, or close to that. If you're borrowing, no government in the history of this country has borrowed $1 billion in a year or even in 5 years. This government is going to do it in 1 year, $1 billion. So you're borrowing, and the honorable member from Castries office said it, you have to borrow money to finance growth. He's admitting that this government is achieving growth through huge borrowings. But you know who has to repay those loans? The next generation that has to repay those loans. And I'm reflecting, Mr. Speaker, if all what the honorable member said is the reason why these workshops are being held, and that the government wants to know now what it has to do to achieve a developing society, why have we borrowed so heavily? Why? So, Mr. Speaker, this may be necessary, the view of the government, but in Alice in Wonderland, this is as mad as the Hatter. It's contradictory, incongruent.
Who's the Hatter?
Oh, honorable member from Beaufort South, the Hatter wears the tallest hat. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm totally lost as to where this government is taking our country. And I think very soon we'll have an exhaustive debate in this House where we shall examine the case against this government. Thank you very much.